In a peaceful city in South Korea, neighbors still can't believe it. The man they once saw laughing and joking with children at birthday parties, who always politely greeted everyone each morning, who was considered an exemplary father, turned out to be the perpetrator of two shocking murders that rocked public opinion. On the afternoon of April 16, 2020, in the peaceful city of Jeonju, a man walked into the police station with a face full of worry. His younger sister, Kim Jong-hee, 34 years old, had vanished without a trace for the past 2 days. Her phone was turned off, and all attempts to contact her had failed. What made him even more uneasy was the strange scene at his sister's apartment. The house was empty, but the lights remained flickering day and night, as if the owner had just stepped out and would return at any moment. But Jong-hee never came back. In her brother's heart, a terrifying premonition of some disaster was gradually becoming clear. Initially, investigators viewed this as just a routine case. To them, Jong-hee at 34 was mature enough to make her own life decisions and could have voluntarily left home without notifying anyone. However, her family firmly rejected this view. She would never do that, they emphasized to the police. Jong-hee isn't the type of person to suddenly disappear like that. Something has happened to her. Pressure from the family forced police to take the case more seriously. When investigators stepped into the small apartment where Jong-hee lived alone, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The half-finished meal on the table had turned sour and moldy, showing the owner had been absent for at least several days. Everything seemed to tell a silent story of sudden departure without preparation. The most important clue was found through the area's security camera system. The last image of Jong-hee was recorded at 10:40 p.m. on April 14, 2020, a seemingly normal scene that contained something strange. She appeared in the familiar alley in front of her house wearing simple clothes, flip-flops, and a tracksuit. What was notable was that Jong-hee was walking while talking on the phone, seemingly being persuaded by someone. Finally, she got into a black Honda and disappeared into the night. That was the last time anyone saw Jong-hee alive. The search for the black Honda didn't take long. Just 1 day after receiving the missing person report through the vehicle registration database, police had identified the owner, Choi Shin-jong. When investigators appeared at his door, Shin-jong appeared calm and ready to cooperate. His story sounded reasonable and simple. Jong-hee was my wife's close friend, he explained naturally. That day I had something I needed her help with, so I called and invited her into the car to talk. According to Shin-jong's account, they simply chatted in the car while he drove around the area. Nothing special happened, no arguments or conflicts. Finally, Jong-hee requested to get out at some intersection, the specific location he couldn't remember clearly. After that, we had no further contact. Shin-jong concluded his story with a facade of fake concern. I don't know what happened to her after we parted ways. A seemingly convincing story, but was it the truth? Shin-jong's testimony left investigators suspicious. However, lacking concrete evidence, they were forced to temporarily accept this story and continue expanding their search scope. The breakthrough came when the investigation delved into financial details. Jong-hee's bank records began telling a completely different story, one full of contradictions and suspicion. At 12:06 a.m. on the day of the incident, Jong-hee's account made an unusual transaction. The 1,000 won, about $0.75, automatically stored daily to pay for family internet fees had been withdrawn. A large sum of 92,000 won, about $69, leaving only 2 won in the account. But what shocked the police was that just 6 minutes later, at 12:12 a.m., a transfer of 480,000 won, about $360, was made from Jong-hee's account, and the recipient was none other than Choi Shin-jong. After she disappeared from home, these two unusual financial transactions made police once again suspicious of Shin-jong. They persistently traced every surveillance camera in the area, following the path of the black Honda, and discovered that after meeting with Jong-hee, the two hadn't quickly parted ways. Even after the money transfer at 12:12 a.m., footage still showed both were present in the car and the vehicle had headed toward the outskirts. Particularly, the security camera of the convenience store right below Jong Hee's building also captured Shin-jong. Just 5 minutes before the meeting, he had stopped there to buy a box cutter. All clues pointed to Shin-jong, making it impossible for him to escape connection to this mysterious disappearance. On April 19th, police urgently arrested Shin-jong for interrogation. When asked about the 480,000 won that Jong Hee had transferred to him, Shin-jong explained that this was precisely why he had sought out Jong Hee that day, to borrow money to pay gambling debts. As for buying the knife, he justified it as preparation to end his own life. These explanations were clearly unconvincing. Police quickly obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched Shin-jong's house. During the search, they discovered Jong Hee's gold bracelet. However, he still firmly denied any involvement in the disappearance. With a defiant attitude, Shin-jong declared he would not accept any charges until police found truly decisive evidence. On April 22, 2020, while Jeonju police were tirelessly searching for the missing Jong Hee, they unexpectedly received a request for investigative assistance from colleagues in Busan. A 29-year-old woman named Park Da-eun had come to Jeonju on Saturday, April 18th, and disappeared that evening. The last information Da-eun sent to her family was that she would visit Jeonju with a friend for the weekend. However, from that evening on, the family completely lost contact with her. Police found the companion's friend, also the last person to see Da-eun. He recounted that on the evening of April 18th, they had traveled together from Busan to Jeonju. After touring the ancient Hanok village, both called a taxi to return. Da-eun said she would stop to meet a friend, so the taxi stopped at the Seohak-dong Community Center in Wonsan District. Da-eun got out and immediately got into a black car, then quietly left. From that moment, they had no further news of each other. Police investigated related surveillance cameras and quickly identified the black Honda. The owner of this car was none other than Shin-jong, who was already in custody. The fact that people related to both missing persons cases had gotten into the same car couldn't just be a random coincidence. Police were certain that Shin-jong was involved in both cases. In the next interrogation, Jeonju police questioned Shin-jong about whether he had met Da-eun. Shin-jong was forced to admit that he and Da-eun were acquaintances through the internet, having met through a chat app and agreed to meet on April 18th because their conversations were quite compatible. According to him, Da-eun got in the car, they exchanged a few simple words, then she got out and left. However, police no longer trusted these unconvincing explanations. Police conducted a meticulous search of Shin-jong's Honda. The inspection results showed suspicious bloodstains inside the car, hair, and a roll of duct tape, which police suspected was used to bind victims. After forensic analysis, they confirmed the blood in the car belonged to Jong Hee, the hair belonged to Da-eun, and discovered fingerprints of both women. Police immediately launched parallel investigations into both disappearances. Through tracing phone signals and GPS positioning of Shin-jong's car, they discovered he had stopped for extended periods at several locations in the outskirts of Jeonju City. Focusing their search on these areas, police successively found the bodies of both victims. On April 23, 2020, Jong Hee's body was discovered by the riverbank in Imsil district, not far from Jeonju City, hidden in bushes along the river. On May 12, 2020, Da-eun's body was also found in Wonju district in the Jeonju vicinity, dumped in a deserted orchard. After confirming both missing women had died, Shin-jong finally had to give up and admit the entire brutal truth about the murders he had committed. What was notable was that both cases occurred right inside his black Honda, the place that became the scene of these savage crimes. Jong Hee had been the closest friend to Shin-jong's wife for over a decade, their friendship built and nourished over many years. Because Jong Hee was older and seemed more mature, both women were always close, with Jong Hee being like an older sister. Jong Hee frequently provided financial help to her younger friend whenever circumstances were difficult. However, this kindness and goodwill sometimes inadvertently became the cause of disagreements and arguments with her husband about family financial matters. Jong Hee's benevolent heart and willingness to help couldn't escape Shin-jong's observation and calculation. When he fell into desperate straits due to mounting gambling debts, Jong-hee naturally became the first and easiest target on his list of people he could turn to and exploit. According to detailed confessions he gave police during interrogation. On the evening of April 14th, he proactively called Jong-hee to ask for a loan to pay gambling debts, while lamenting that these complex external debts had made his married life tense, with endless arguments and disagreements. After the two met, Shin-jong drove Jong-hee around so they could talk privately in the enclosed space of the car. He began confiding about the financial difficulties weighing on his family and the complex emotional problems between him and his wife. Jong-hee, with her inherent benevolent heart, sympathized and decided to help by immediately transferring 480,000 won to him. However, on the dark and deserted road, dark thoughts began creeping into Shin-jong's mind. He suddenly developed evil intentions toward Jong-hee. With malicious intent, he drove Jong-hee to deserted suburban areas with little foot traffic, preparing to commit the heinous act of rape. When Jong-hee realized his terrifying intentions and began resisting strongly to protect herself, Shin-jong completely lost control and fell into a rage. In that moment of madness, he directly strangled Jong-hee to death, the very person who had just kindly lent him money to overcome difficulties. After committing the brutal crime, Shin-jong callously and coldly dumped the victim's body in roadside bushes. Not stopping there, he also stole Jong-hee's valuable gold bracelet worth 3 million won, 2,250. When he returned home after committing the crime, he was able to calmly present this bracelet as a gift to his wife, lying that it was something he had just bought at a second-hand store cheaply, completely concealing the brutal truth behind this gift. In his confession about his crimes, Shin-jong claimed that due to excessive mental pressure, he had used his wife's antidepressants without a doctor's prescription. According to him, using this medication made his mind foggy and lose control, leading to committing another crime just 4 days after killing Jong-hee. Shin-jong and Da-eun had met through a mobile messaging app. On April 18th, Da-eun had informed him she would travel from Busan to Jeonju for tourism and city exploration, so they arranged to meet that evening. After their evening meeting, Shin-jong drove Da-eun around Jeonju city for sightseeing, making it seem like a normal outing. However, he then deliberately drove to a deserted gas station where employees had finished their shifts and no one was on duty. There, Shin-jong proposed having sex with Da-eun but was firmly rejected. This rejection sent him into an uncontrollable rage. Surveillance footage from the gas station captured Da-eun trying to get out of the car to escape the dangerous situation, but Shin-jong used force to drag her back into the car, then slammed the car door shut with a decisive force. Afterward, in the enclosed space of the car, Shin-jong beat Da-eun and committed savage rape. He used duct tape to bind the victim, making her completely helpless and unable to resist. After committing the heinous crime, he continued driving Da-eun to deserted suburban areas. Despite Da-eun's continuous pleas and begging for her life, Shin-jong remained cruel and cold, showing no emotion. Finally, he cruelly strangled Da-eun to death, then dumped her body in a deserted orchard. However, fate didn't let Shin-jong escape the consequences of his criminal acts. Just 1 day after he dumped Da-eun's body, police arrested him based on important clues and remaining evidence from Jong-hee's murder, the first crime he had committed. Shin-jong admitted the full truth about the brutal crimes he committed, but tried to shift responsibility by claiming these actions didn't stem from his true intentions. He insisted he had been severely affected by antidepressants, and especially before committing the second crime, he had also used alcohol, leading to mental weakness and loss of control. His emphasis on this mental weakness could be considered a calculated strategy, because according to South Korean law, if criminals commit illegal acts while mentally impaired due to medication or alcohol use, and this is confirmed through medical evaluation, they may be considered for reduced sentences. However, police completely rejected these unfounded defense arguments. Time evidence showed Jong-hee was killed in the early morning of April 15th, while Da-eun was murdered on April 18th, and Shin-jong dumped the body in the early morning of April 19th before being arrested by police immediately afterward. Within just 4 days, he had consecutively committed 2 serious murders. Moreover, many signs and evidence pointed to these not being impulsive or uncontrolled actions, but calculated premeditated crimes with planning and conspiracy, demonstrated through tool preparation, location selection, and consequence management methods. For instance, the box cutter he had prepared before meeting Jong-hee was the tool used to threaten and force the victim to abandon any intention of resistance. The relationship between him and Da-eun only remained at the level of online acquaintances, and that day's meeting was actually their first blind date. When they met, they didn't even know each other's real names or true appearance and personality. It was tragic that this first and final meeting became a deadly tragedy for Da-eun. During deeper investigation, police discovered that Shin-jong frequently used social media apps and random matching software to find and approach women through messaging and chatting. He appeared to be very skillful and eloquent, able to attract and create good impressions with women easily. Over approximately 2 years, he had established contact and maintained conversations with a total of 1,148 different women. To ensure accuracy and comprehensiveness of the investigation, police verified the safety status of each of these online friends individually. Results showed that among over 1,100 women he had contacted, only Da-eun was the sole person who came to meet him directly and unfortunately encountered tragedy. Police also thoroughly studied Shin-jong's past and background, concluding that the crimes he committed bore very typical characteristics of dangerous criminals. His behaviors showed impulsive nature, but also tendencies to repeat according to certain patterns, accompanied by very high levels of concealment and hiding. These manifestations would typically erupt in specific phases, exactly like the behavior of many serial killers that criminal history has recorded. Once someone overcame the initial psychological barrier when committing their first crime, committing the second crime became much easier. The perpetrator's methods and techniques would continuously be upgraded and refined with each occurrence, while their psychology would also develop addiction-like states, making them extremely dangerous and unpredictable to society. To ensure maximum safety for citizens, maintain the public's right to information, and prevent the possibility of additional victims, the Jeollabuk-do Provincial Police Department decided to publicly release all personal information and photos of Shin-jong. This action was taken to warn and protect the community from potential dangers. Immediately after this information was officially released, media outlets quickly began reporting and pursuing detailed coverage of the incident while conducting extensive investigations into the social background, life, and past of the perpetrator. Colleagues who had worked with Shin-jong all felt extremely shocked and couldn't believe this truth. None of them could imagine that the man they knew daily could be such a cruel killer. In everyone's impression, Shin-jong always presented a very positive and trustworthy image. Although not particularly tall in appearance, he had a cheerful, sociable personality and always appeared to be a very positive person in life. At work, he was evaluated as hardworking, dedicated, and responsible. Moreover, he was very good at joking and creating a cheerful atmosphere for everyone around him, making everyone wonder how such a person could become a cold-blooded killer. However, subsequent in-depth media investigations gradually revealed the dark sides and secrets about Shin-jong that no one had ever known. The truth showed he had a criminal record that was far from clean with many prior convictions, and most concerningly, the majority of his past charges were closely related to serious sexual crimes. This showed his criminal behavior wasn't impulsive or accidental, but had recidivist characteristics with dangerous escalating tendencies over time. Shin-jong was born in March 1989 in Jeonju City, Jeollabuk-do Province, South Korea. From his early years, he demonstrated exceptional talent in wrestling, continuously winning championships in various weight classes with impressive results. With these brilliant successes, he was evaluated as having great prospects and potentially becoming one of the top athletes the Korean Sports Association had high hopes for. However, early success and status in the sports world seemed to change Shin-jong's personality in negative directions. After being promoted to captain of the Jeonju wrestling team, he began revealing his evil nature by frequently bullying younger team members, showing increasingly clear and concerning violent tendencies. The strength and wrestling techniques he possessed became tools to oppress and threaten those around him. Gradually, everyone felt afraid of this former Jeonju champion because of his violent and unpredictable personality. Due to bullying and abuse occurring too frequently and severely when entering high school, Shin-jong was officially expelled from the wrestling team and banned from participating in all activities. This meant his promising athletic career had ended disappointingly. Perhaps because he had participated in wrestling and had a solid martial arts foundation, Shin-jong continued becoming a notorious bully in school. With his strong physique and superior strength, he didn't discriminate in attacking anyone, whether younger students or even those older than himself. His behavior was very cruel and vicious, always beating until the other party completely submitted and begged before stopping. The situation became worse when he joined local criminal organizations. In this toxic environment, his violent tendencies weren't just unrestrained, but continued escalating alarmingly. He frequently caused disturbances, participated in fights and conflicts, combined with his vengeful personality and never forgiving anyone, making him quickly become a regular at the local police station. Regarding dealing with police and the judicial system, Shin-jong could be considered a dangerous expert. He was very skilled in facing interrogations, knowing how to avoid key questions and always trying to shift responsibility elsewhere. Particularly, he also had deep understanding of legal procedures and sentencing levels, which helped him calculate and develop strategies to minimize legal consequences for himself. However, Shin-jong's most serious problem was his almost abnormal and pathological sexual desires. He frequently asked people around him to introduce women to him, and more concerningly, he really enjoyed using violence against women. According to memories of former classmates, even during high school, Shin-jong had used violence and threats to rape several female students at the same school. More horrifying was that he didn't feel ashamed, but continuously bragged about these depraved acts in front of friends and appeared proud. The victims, fearing retaliation, didn't dare report to police, creating conditions for him to continue committing crimes without punishment. After reaching adulthood, Shin-jong became even more brazen and no longer respected anyone. 1 year before the murder case occurred, Shin-jong went to karaoke with his friend Ho-cheol and his wife. After eating, Ho-cheol drove the group past a convenience store. Feeling thirsty, Ho-cheol got out to buy drinks, leaving only Shin-jong and his wife in the car. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Shin-jong suddenly drove the car away from the original spot, taking the car to a deserted alley and began making advances on his friend's wife. When rejected, he disregarded her strong objections to grope her inappropriately, essentially committing sexual harassment, and even tried to kiss her. Fortunately, it wasn't too dark yet, and the victim resisted determinedly, finally escaping the dangerous situation. Ho-cheol and his wife determined this was a serious attempted rape and decided to report to police. Shin-jong later brought his wife to their house to apologize. Ho-cheol's couple were old friends of Shin-jong's wife, so when learning about this, his wife nearly went crazy. In front of the victim, she hit Shin-jong's head with a bag of herbs, making everything chaotic. Initially, Ho-cheol's couple firmly refused reconciliation and definitely wanted to send him to prison. However, Shin-jong began harassing them daily, continuously coming to their house to force quick reconciliation. During this time, he performed many unreasonable and threatening actions, making Ho-cheol's couple unable to live normally. Finally, under various forms of threats and bribes, Ho-cheol's couple couldn't endure this mental torture anymore, and both sides reached a reconciliation agreement. Shin-jong once again escaped legal punishment. He always knew that as long as he reached reconciliation with victims, the problem wouldn't become serious. This became his usual trick, and wasn't unrelated to why he began committing crimes in 2012 and continued recidivating for many years afterward while still escaping punishment. In 2012, when Shin-jong was 23 years old, his girlfriend proposed breaking up. Shin-jong completely refused to accept this decision, but his girlfriend's attitude was very firm and decisive. In a final effort to salvage the relationship, he proposed what seemed like a reasonable request. They would take one final trip together, and after returning would completely end the relationship. His girlfriend, perhaps wanting to end everything peacefully, agreed to this proposal. However, from the departure day, Shin-jong had prepared a cruel plot by bringing along a sharp knife. The trip had just begun when he drove to a highway rest stop, a deserted place with little foot traffic. There, he pulled out the knife to threaten his girlfriend, making her fall into complete panic and helplessness. In the enclosed space of the car, he illegally controlled and detained her for 6 terrifying hours while committing savage rape. After committing the crime, he also threatened her not to report to police, or he would kill her entire family in revenge. However, the victim showed intelligence and courage by secretly preserving important evidence of the crime he had committed. Immediately after returning to Jeonju, she reported to police and provided complete evidence of the incident. This time, Shin-jong couldn't escape legal punishment like previous times. However, he was still handled disappointingly lightly. Once again, he used his familiar tactic by using money to reach a reconciliation agreement with the victim and her family, thereby being forgiven and receiving reduced punishment. Finally, Shin-jong was only sentenced to 3 years in prison, but with a 5-year suspended sentence, meaning he only had to pay fines without actually serving jail time. In retrospect, this punishment was truly too light and didn't match the serious nature of the crime he committed, which may have inadvertently created conditions for him to continue committing crimes in the future. Shin-jong didn't stop after escaping punishment. In 2015, during his probation period, he committed another crime. To pay off all gambling debts, he broke into a supermarket and stole 21 million won, 15,750. Although he covered his face during the crime, police still quickly solved the case. Afterward, Shin-jong and the supermarket owner again reached reconciliation, returning fines and compensation. Normally, combined with the previous 3-year sentence, he should have received severe punishment, but ultimately only served 6 months before being released. When this was exposed, South Korean people also felt very frustrated, because his not paying an appropriate price that year also gave him more lucky psychology when later developing extreme thoughts again. After being released from prison, Shin-jong seemed to have positive changes on the surface, becoming much gentler and milder. At least outwardly, he no longer displayed arrogant attitudes or participated in fights like before. He found a delivery job and maintained stability for a long time. No one in his new work environment knew about his criminal past. Everyone only saw a young man who seemed very polite and trustworthy. With this new image, Shin-jong married, had children, and built his own life. After starting a family, he operated a delivery company right in the city, with relatively stable business operations and monthly income of about 6 to 7 million won, 4,500 to 5,250 dollars. In the eyes of those around him, he was seen as a hardworking man who worked to support his family, a model of a responsible husband and father. However, everything people saw was just Shin-jong's very deep and sophisticated concealment. Although the peaceful and stable life seemed to have created a solid defense line between his dark inner self and the outside world, ultimately he couldn't always maintain the suppression and concealment of his abnormal sexual desires. That pathological and abnormal craving for women continued simmering in his mind, and as soon as the right opportunity arose, that seemingly solid defense line would immediately collapse completely. In March 2019, when Shin-jong went to karaoke, his true nature was revealed once again. He still used violence to rape a female server at the karaoke bar. After committing the crime, he once again applied his familiar trick by reaching a reconciliation agreement with the karaoke bar owner and compensating 5 million won, 3,750, to settle the matter, once again escaping severe legal punishment. A few months later, Shin-jong once again fell into serious financial crisis due to online gambling addiction, forcing his business to close completely. At this point, Shin-jong could no longer maintain the peace and stability he had before. Paradoxically, right before the horrific events occurred, he still organized a birthday party for his child, trying his best to display a positive image and responsibility as an exemplary father. However, not long after, he had completely fallen and committed brutal crimes within 4 days, consecutively murdering 2 innocent women. Most disgustingly, he had even chosen his wife's closest friend, Jong-hee, as his first crime target. With just one phone call, he had lured Jong-hee out and cruelly killed the person who was always ready to help and trust him unconditionally. After committing the first crime, perhaps realizing that being caught was only a matter of time, Shin-jong used his phone to record some audio clips. In these recordings, he expressed gratitude for the past years and sent blessings to his wife and child, as if this was the final testament of someone about to depart. However, after this testament that seemed to show repentance, just 3 days later, Shin-jong continued committing another murder. He killed Da-eun, a young girl who had also blindly trusted him and agreed to meet. On October 20th, 2020, the case was officially transferred to court for trial. The prosecution presented severe charges, affirming that Shin-jong had murdered 2 innocent women and brutally dumped their bodies. They emphasized that his criminal methods were extremely cruel and savage, and extensive evidence clearly proved these were premeditated murders with calculation. Based on the serious nature of the crimes, the prosecution requested the court to sentence him to death, the highest penalty under the law. Meanwhile, Shin-jong's defense attorney continued using the mental impairment excuse to try to secure a lighter sentence for their client. Shin-jong himself also persisted with testimony that due to the influence of medication and alcohol, during the crimes he had no memory and couldn't control his behavior. On November 5th, 2020, Jeonju District Court sentenced Shin-jong to life imprisonment. However, both sides were dissatisfied with this result. Shin-jong decided to appeal to seek reduced punishment, while the prosecution also felt the sentence was too light for the serious nature of the crimes, and filed an appeal requesting a heavier sentence. On March 3, 2021, at the appellate court hearing, in his final statement, Shin-jong mentioned his family's circumstances. He said his wife and son were suffering greatly because their personal information had been publicly disclosed. He emphasized that these crimes were entirely caused by himself and not his family's fault, asking the public to stop verbal violence and harassment toward his wife and child. On July 9, 2021, South Korea's Supreme Court delivered its verdict in this case. The court rejected both appeals from Shin-jong and the prosecution. Finally, the Supreme Court upheld the original life imprisonment sentence. The Shin-jong case has become an expensive lesson about how society needs to have a stricter attitude toward sex crimes, not allowing money to wash away sins. Only when the legal system truly deters dangerous criminals can tragedies like those of Young-hee and Da-eun be prevented. And that concludes today's case. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share in the comments below. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.